Welcome to the After Dark podcast. I'm your host, Ryan After Dark. I'm here with my lovely wife, Jess After Dark.
Hey guys, that was a good intro. You haven't done our intro before.
I know.
Took me by surprise.
I know. That's it.
All right. Well, I'm glad to be back. We have not been, Brian and I actually haven't even been together for like 5 or 6 days. I was out of town for work. So much fun.
Yeah. This is the first conversation I've had with anybody in about 5 days. So
It's just been a hold up
super
at
awkward.
home. It's weird, right? Going from working in an environment like outside the home to working in home. I remember when I first made that transition, it was rough.
Yeah.
So
Like the only time I leave the house is like to go to the grocery store.
correct. It's like, hi, thank you for bagging my groceries. And they're like, thanks. And you're like, you're the only person I've talked to today. And they're like, okay, goodbye.
No, it's so true though.
And like trying to find your schedule and stuff like that. Like it's so important to like, it took me a long time to kind of figure out what that looked like. So it's important though. It's good for the brain.
It's good for the brain.
That's what we're actually going to talk about today.
Talking about brain.
Yeah, get that brain.
Nice.
No, but in my training, we were talking about, because I'll be a manager in the role that I'm going to be playing in. And so we were kind of talking about different, like, people respond to different things differently and just like kind of learning people and why you respond the way you do. We were just talking about the brain and I was like, this is just to me, this has always been such an interesting topic, is how individuals perceive things and react to things and how that kind of leads to, I don't know, how they live their daily life.
Yeah.
So, I don't even think I've really told you too much about what I was learning, but I was like, I feel like this is such a conversation you and I just have as pillow talk. So we might as well make it a thing.
This is something I enjoy anyways.
Yeah.
So.
Like figuring out like how, like, I don't know what makes people tick. So basically we learned there's 2 parts of the brain, which I've known this for a while. But you have one part, I'm not even going to pretend like I know the part of the brain, but it's basically your instinct reaction. Like you don't even think, you're not even conscious when you use this part of the brain. It's what, like, life faces something at you and this is your immediate reaction. You use this part of the brain. And then as you develop, actually your frontal lobe is not even fully developed until your later 20s. Yeah. So
it makes a lot of sense.
Correct. And I think men's frontal lobe probably
it's super late. Yeah, it's like 30.
Much later. And that's the logical part of the brain. So that's your second thought. So you have your initial thought very fast, and then you have this second thought after that that's more logical and less emotional. And I've always said this, that I am a firm believer that your first thought you have in a situation is actually how you were conditioned by society. So I like to use this as an example, like when you judge somebody, like you see somebody out and about and say the girl's skirt is super short or something. This is just an example. And your first reaction is like, oh, why is she wearing that? Like her skirt is really short. That society has conditioned you to think that way. I grew up in a very, very cultured home. Like a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Sheltered home.
Sheltered home. Yeah.
So like wearing a skirt, not
cultured.
cultured at all. So very sheltered home. So like my initial thought may be like, oh, why is she wearing that? And then I believe your second thought that follows right after is actually who you are as a person. So like my second thought would be like, why the fuck did you just say that shit?
Right.
Like let that girl wear what she wants. And like, I'm a firm believer also that if you use that second thought enough, it eventually becomes your first thought. So now my first thought is when I see a girl in a short skirt, I'm like, yeah, girl, get it.
Right.
Totally changed. So that's essentially what we were talking about in my training. And I thought that was just such an interesting concept. And I don't think a lot of people like realize, how their brain works in that sense. And sometimes they might just more rely on that very first thought, not realizing you need to condition that second thought.
Yeah, because I feel like I go through scenarios where it's like I'll think something and I literally say to myself, well, that was fucked up. You shouldn't have thought that. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
and it makes you feel like a bad person, does it not? Like your second thought is like, wow, I'm a shitty person. Why did I think that? But that's not you.
Right.
That second thought was you.
Right.
Because that first thought, where did that come from?
Right.
You didn't have time to like articulate that thought. It just popped up.
Right.
And I think maybe like I struggle with it. I like to think I'm a bad person. I say this to you all the time. I don't think I'm a nice person. And you're like, yes, you are. And I'm like, I don't know. I like my initial reaction a lot of times is not necessarily nice.
Right.
I do think there's a balance between being a rude person and just being a person with boundaries, which will be the next point of of today's podcast is boundaries. So we're going to talk about that. But I think it took me a while to realize those first thoughts weren't my thoughts. Those first thoughts were what society pushed on me.
Right.
And so kind of reconditioning those thoughts. And it's not just how you think to other people, it's how you think about yourself.
Yeah, that's a big one too.
Like your first initial thoughts, I mean, I'm not even going to pretend like I'm all secure. I was super insecure today. And my first thoughts, I tried on a bathing suit. My first thoughts were negative. And it's like, I had to like logically remove the emotion from it and understand like, no, you are not looking like trash. You just feel bad because you had to eat out all week because you went traveling and like, you know, you didn't have your thing. So I think the brain and like not understanding maybe how it works can lead people down to like a dark road of being stuck in their head when you don't have all the information of how and why your brain is working the way it does.
Right. Well, not all, the other one is kind of like how to control it too. Like, you know, there's external factors to all of that too. That's diet, exercise, like, you know, all these different things can help pull you out of that. But a lot of people don't know what to do when they're in those situations. Like I had that conversation with Kelsey where I drew basically a little map and I was like, okay, you're feeling like this now. How can we make like this chemical higher here? And she was like, that makes so much sense. Now I'm going to go do all these things whenever I feel like this. And it's like, but yeah, it really can be that easy if you just know what to do to help it.
Correct. And it's like a lot of times, and I'll advocate for this, I've suffered with a lot of emotional valleys in my life, but sometimes that first step is the hardest. Like even me, I know we've done a lot of research on like what to do when I get in those states. And it's just like, I don't want to though. It's like, I understand that we are basically complicated houseplants. Like I need water, I need sunlight, I need to be loved, I need kind words. But sometimes I just don't want to get up and go outside. And so sometimes that very first step is like, just do it. Like I don't know like how else to say it other than like, just go outside for a couple minutes. Yeah, people
forget that like humans in, you know, in our past, you know, like we were outside 80 to 90% of the time. And now like we'll go days without seeing sunlight.
This goes back to you staying home all week, right? Like we're forced into like, we're staring at screens. We're staying inside. We're not moving our bodies. And that leads to just severe, like, more depression. Like, I mean, like there's no other way to say it. Like, and a lot of times you don't even realize you're in that state until you almost leave it. Like, I remember in college, looking back, there were months where I was like severely depressed and I had no idea until I started getting out of it. And I was like, this is how I'm supposed to feel. Like, that is not how I was feeling these last 6 months or whatever the case may be. But yeah, like every time I feel like that, I know how to get out of it. Just sometimes just taking that first step. But I just always know that like after I go on that walk, you've dragged me on like so many walks and like get out of the house. And I've like cried starting the walk. Like I just don't want to be there.
Before we made it out of the driveway.
I know. I cried because our neighbor was outside and I didn't feel like talking. And you were like, you're going to be fine.
It's going to be okay.
And by the end of the walk, it was good. Much better. So, but yeah, I feel like all of that is just all connected to the brain. Like the chemicals within the brain need to be released. And when I don't know how to word it because I don't really study this a lot, but like suppressing those chemicals, like the endorphins in our brain by staring at screens, staying inside, it leads us down this like kind of like a interesting hole. But back on track to like what I was originally saying, like as far as your thought process and stuff like that, I think even just knowing that the first thought, second thought, like maybe not reacting or like judging your whole life plan off that first initial reaction to things is kind of important because that's the part of your brain that's like fire, emotions, like quit your job. I want to quit my job. It's fine. But also in our training, we were just talking about different things and how to like work with people and interact with people. And I know, and that was more like a professional setting. But I kind of brought up how important it is to have boundaries.
Right.
That is a huge topic that you and I love to talk about a lot. I don't know if we're really good at setting boundaries because we've been forced to learn how to set boundaries.
Probably that one.
Or if we lack, I don't know, some
Empathy.
empathy. I don't that we've just been screwed over so many times that we just lack it. But yeah, I think that you and I have been put into a lot of situations where we were kind of forced to set boundaries that we didn't necessarily always like want to set at first, but then we learned the power of setting boundaries. And I think we're friends with quite a few people that actually don't know how to set good boundaries. I actually read a book. You read a book too.
It was.
I read it. I read a nonfiction
How to
book,
Set a
y'all.
Boundary.
Yeah, correct.
It
It's
was
like setting
self-help,
boundaries, setting boundaries or whatever.
I forget who it was by, but yeah.
But kind of like working through how to set up relationships in a healthy manner in which you set the boundary for yourself. In all relationships, right? Like I have boundaries set with you. I have boundaries set with my employers, with my friends, with my family. And it took a long time to learn how to set those boundaries. And again, I think we were kind of pressured into having to make those decisions. But I think our lives got so much better once we learned how to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much I want to go into that, but I feel like I sat in kind of like a meeting in which we were talking about like, what do you do?
Well, it was a training. It was a professional training to teach you how to.
Yeah. And they kind of talked about like, what do you do if somebody yells at you? Like a client yells at you. And I was like, oh, like keep in mind, I'm a manager, so I have people below me. And I was like, oh, like you would professionally be like, this conversation is not heading in a productive way. Like we're going to step out. We're going to leave. We will circle back later and remove ourselves from the situation. Like at the end of the day, no one should speak to you in that manner. Like there's no excuse in which somebody should be raising their voice to you, especially in a professional setting.
Right.
What on earth? And I was told I was wrong, but I should have just like let it happen.
Just sit there and let it happen.
And I was like, So it was kind of an interesting thought. And like, I get what they were trying to say, like I would escalate it later with like the person above me. But I think when you are setting boundaries with yourself, it's one thing. And I know a lot of people like won't stand up for themselves, but will stand up for their family and their friends. You know, they're quicker to be like, don't talk to my friend like that or whatever the case may be. First of all, that you should always stick up for yourself the same way that you would like you matter. Like at the end of the day, you matter. And having this mindset of like, oh, don't touch my kid or don't touch my husband or don't whatever, but whatever, you say what you want to me, like BS. Like
no,
you need to be your first advocate always, because you matter. And it doesn't matter what situation. So like if anyone's telling you in a professional setting that you should just kind of take it as is, the customer's always right mentality. No, absolutely not. I'm not saying escalate the situation further, but remove yourself from that situation. You don't deserve that. That stress, like that disrespect. Absolutely not. And then the same thing goes for your interpersonal relationships with friends and family. I hate the idea of like, they're family. Oh, I can't do anything. They're family. Like,
what are you going to do? It's my insert whatever relationship it is. But yeah, no, that's not the way that it is. And like, I guess kind of circling back to like the professional side of things. So like I've been in situations where people have came to me and done exactly that, where they start raising their voice, start talking down to me, whatever it is. And my instinct is always, do you want to circle back and try that again?
Yep.
Because that's not going to fly. Yeah. Like, you know, I'm not saying like, I'm not going to escalate that.
Yeah, correct.
I'm going to stop the conversation right there. And if it's, if you can't handle beyond that, that's okay.
Correct. We'll try again in 20 minutes. Take a walk, take a lap. Like it's nothing's that serious. Like at the end of the day, I like to keep in mind, like kind of like move yourself from the situation and be like, is this going to matter in 5 years? Is this going to matter? Like, then if not, then let's just all calm down and like recircle back on this.
Right.
Like, it's not that heavy, but it's a matter of because here's where the boundary kind of comes in, right? You let that person talk to you like that one time, they're going to talk to you like that every single time.
Yep.
And frankly, if that person got to a point where they feel comfortable yelling at you, you probably broke some boundaries before that.
Yeah.
Like that allowed them to get like that.
Yeah.
And ironically, I had said, nobody's ever yelled at me. And a lot of people in the room were like, no way. And I didn't realize till later, it's because I've never allowed anyone to push a boundary to think they could yell at me. Like I've had people kind of start to get a little amped and I bring that right back down.
Right.
But we've had a lot of practice on doing that personally. So I don't think a lot of people know how to practice boundary setting.
Yep.
And I think it's because of this flawed idea that, oh, it's okay. They can say whatever they want to me. I can just take it.
Right.
When in reality, no, like, why should you have to?
Yeah. You don't have to escalate it. You know, like I said, like in that given situation that I brought up, like, you know, I stopped the conversation, said, hey, we can circle back, you know, try again.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you can't,
And I'm sure
okay, let's move on.
immediate, like pretty quickly, they realize like they
Normally
kind of
that's-
look dumb, right? Like,
Yeah.
but if you didn't call it out, they would always come to you with that level of
Right. Well, how do you
Whatever.
carry on a conversation in that tone again?
no.
Like that's just them trying to take it to the next level, which again, most people would never intentionally do that.
Correct.
So
They start to realize
yeah.
like
a little
they kind of-
self-reflection. real
Yeah,
quick.
correct. You know, and it might take them 20 minutes. They might storm out and that's fine, but that's not on you. And I think a lot of people internalize that. They're like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Like, no, not your monkey, not your problem. But you know, like you see that in our relationship. Ryan has had to boundary me. Like I used to be like that. I grew up in a family that escalating the conversation was how we resolved problems.
Yeah.
Ew.
Loudest in the room.
Loudest in the
won
room wins,
argument.
right? And that's like reflecting. That's not not right. Like, but had you not set that boundary with me very early on, that's how I would have still responded. And did I want to hear the boundary right away? No one wants a boundary pushed on them.
Right.
However, this is when you make a choice. The whole idea, if they wanted to, they would. Like,
Right.
I wanted to be with you. I wanted to work on our relationship. So that was something I was willing to work on.
Right.
And I don't think I've raised my voice again in years. Like, I don't feel the need to now. I also learned that you don't raise your voice to me either. So
Yeah.
when everyone's de-escalated, we're fine.
Right.
But yeah, like learning to set those boundaries. And then I think the hardest part is following up when the boundaries are broken or pushed. People will push boundaries because, again, no one wants to hear a boundary set on them. But you are not in the wrong for setting a boundary. You're never in the wrong for setting a boundary. People may disagree with your boundary. Your boundary may be crazy to someone else. But if that's a boundary that matters to you, it's kind of a take it or leave it situation. Like you're going to find somebody that does respect that boundary, but just also remember, if you put a boundary on one person, be willing to have
goes
the
both ways,
same
for
boundary,
sure. Yeah.
right? Like you can't be like, you can't do any of this, but I'm going to do all of this. That's
Right.
not that in that case, that's not just boundary. That's just disrespectful.
Right.
So learning that like, it's almost like the pick your battle situation. Like your boundaries should be like your fundamental core beliefs that you draw in the sand. Like this matters to me.
Right.
And when somebody steps over this, I now need to stand my ground and push that person back behind that boundary again. And just because you set a boundary doesn't mean people aren't going to accidentally cross that boundary. Like you might have to, like, you know, me raising my voice. Like it's not like the next day I never raise my voice again, but like
Right. But the next time that it happened,
Yeah,
you follow up
yep,
with it.
correct.
And it's that implementation. It's the execution that really matters.
Correct.
And again, when you do it, you don't have to just like, if I would have just gone tit for tat with you the whole time,
Nothing would have been
we would have
resolved.
just been sitting here screaming at each other. But instead, I said, hey, I'm not going to let you yell at me.
Yep.
You know, we can circle back to this.
Correct. This is not how we're going to handle these emotional situations.
Right.
And so I eventually learned. It took me a while because I went from yelling to bottling it up because dramatic, right? Like, and then unleashing it all, maybe not yelling, but still unloading it all, to then figuring out like, okay, he doesn't want me yelling at him, but he does want me talking to him.
Yeah.
So like, and that you learn that in different relationships. So, but we would never gotten there without you setting the boundary and holding
Right.
on that boundary when it was crossed. So obviously we talked about with your employers, with your partners, the same goes for family.
Yep.
I think a lot
Friends
of
and
people,
family are big.
yeah, like your family, just because they're blood does not mean that they need to be a part of your life if they
Right.
are not willing to respect you and your boundaries.
Right. Well, it has to be mutually beneficial. Like when you think about it, like if you have a family member and they don't contribute anything productive to your life, like it's really tough to justify then dealing with anything else that comes with that if there's negativity in it.
Correct. No, agreed. It's almost like, now that like we have our daughter, right? And she's 8. Now that we're the parents in situations, I could never imagine looking at her when she becomes a grown adult and expecting a damn thing from her.
Right.
Like, she was our daughter. We raise her. We love her. I hope as she grows older, she wants to stick around. She wants to visit. But I can never imagine expecting her to spend Father's Day with us.
Right.
Like when she's married and she has her own husband, like, or expecting her to come here for Mother's Day, or expecting every holiday or every whatever, or like, we've been in a situation, I need money, or, I need this. And it's like,
yeah.
where our parents' generation, it's almost like this idea, like a tit for tat. Like I raised you, I gave you all this. Now it's your turn to continue to like give everything in these relationships. And it's like, what do you mean? Like I have my own life now. I have all these things. That doesn't mean I owe you anything. I don't know. It's hard to like explain it without explaining our situation, like more in detail. But if you're sitting there going like this, when this person calls me, I stress out. When I get a text from this person, I already know it's going to be something. And like when you're finding yourself, I don't even want to talk to this person.
Right.
Maybe it's a time to reflect of like, would you even be around this person if you weren't blood related? And if that's not the case, maybe it's time to set some boundaries. I'm not saying just go cut off all your family members.
Yeah.
But maybe start to set some boundaries around what's bothering you with that relationship.
Right. Well, that's, I guess, a really good example. That was like with my dad. So my dad would call me every holiday. Every single holiday. And he would start whatever.
He's obliterated.
I mean, he was normally, because he's a major alcohol dependency issues, but he would just call and he would just be mad at the world no matter what it was. He wasn't happy in his life, so therefore nobody else could be. So he would call and he would start saying mean things to me, it was when he started saying mean things to you that was when I kind of made the decision that like, okay.
Which goes back to, you should have made the decision long before.
Oh,
you should have drawn it for yourself. But unfortunately that is the reality. It's it triggered when I got brought in, or when Kels got
Well, it was easier for me to just fight with him for whatever reason. And then whenever it became to you, then it's like, okay, no, that's it.
And I remember having conversations with you because it was one of those things. Every holiday we were having such a good day.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden 7:30 at night comes around and your dad decides now's the time, and the first time in 3 months, to give you a call and say horrendous things to you.
Yeah.
And especially as we progressed more in our lives and became more just successful in our careers or whatever, he wanted more from you.
Yep.
The meaner he got.
Yep.
And it was kind of one of those things that almost became a tradition on a holiday that we just knew all of a sudden you were just going to be so upset. Like, and
if
it
my
just
phone
dampened.
rang, that was it.
It was done. Our holiday's over.
Yep.
And so I remember sitting you down and talking to you about,
Yeah.
like, you don't deserve this. Like, first of all, no one deserves to be talked to. But like, you were just having such a great Christmas, and now you're not. Like, it's over. He spoiled it, and for what? Obviously, you got to a point where you had to block him.
Yep.
You know, and I had to block my dad too. So I'm not alone in this situation.
Yep.
But it's kind of one of those things. Like, unfortunately, it took you years. Though
Well, it took me years to do that.
it's so long. Me too.
Yeah.
You know, like,
and I would go through stints where it'd be like, okay, well, like nothing happened for a while. I'll unblock him, and then he would apologize or whatever, and then it was fine for a month or two or whatever, and then it would just happen again.
yeah.
But yeah, and then it was like, just a typical narcissist stuff.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that's narcissist. We
but-
could have a whole conversation just on that one.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good one because I think a lot of people experience it and maybe they just don't realize it.
It's hard.
It's tough when you're
It's
in it.
hard that to see what a narcissist is. But once you start to pick up on the clues, we realize that more people in our lives, I'm not going to point anybody out, are narcissists. And I think there's levels, right? Like, some of them you can kind of like manage around, versus some it's like, oh, like, I can't even have a conversation with this person without it being turned in a narrative that's beneficial for them. And that becomes really hard and this is good, very hard to set boundaries with a narcissist, because a narcissist will deflect that back on you. Like, you set a boundary, like, hey, don't do this to me. A narcissist will find a way to make that seem like it was you and your problem. And like, how could you think this was me? Like, it's something you need to fix on. And so they push your boundary right back on you.
Right.
And if you are an empath, like, you have empathy for other people, you will tend to take that back and say, okay, wait a minute. Was my boundary too harsh? Whatever. And this is where I'm going to stop you. If you decided a boundary, if someone pushes that back on you, you need to immediately red flag that and remind yourself that that's not how this works.
Yep.
Because you probably never knew that, but that person's most likely a narcissist or something else.
That was a narcissist response.
Correct.
For sure.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because a non-narcissist will look at you and be like, I am sorry. Like, they may be upset, or maybe like, people tend to feel attacked when you tell them you're doing something wrong, and that's okay. But that does not mean that they stand their ground on pushing that back on you. Maybe let them have a moment to kind of like digest it. But a real person with real feelings and real love towards you will recognize your need and will then work on that.
Yep.
Took us way too long.
It took us way too long. Yeah.
Way too long. We're still learning that with people. But I wanted to kind of touch on that because I realized in my training that there are still so many people that do not know how to set boundaries, and that don't understand just a little bit like how their mind works and why they think the way they do. And obviously this kind of topic is something you could talk on for like hours, but just kind of high level overview of understanding like why you internalize the things you do, and then how that reflects on the people that you interact with day to day, and how you can kind of almost change your life by just focusing on just some of the topics we talked about today.
Yeah. It's amazing once you actually implement them into your life, you just see changes take place that are, they just kind of spill over into everything else. You start to set boundaries in your personal life, then they go to professional, then all of a sudden you start to escalate, and then all of a sudden, like, life just seems so much easier.
Correct.
Because you just do things in these manners, and like, I don't know.
And when you set boundaries, keep in mind in all of these aspects of your life, if you are somebody that takes everything off everyone else's shoulders, right? Like the whole like, oh, I'll help you. And you find yourself like overworked, overstressed, just like you're not taking lunches at work. Like you're the only one cleaning the house at home. Like that's because like, hold on. I'm going to say this very slow. That's because of you. Like
Yeah.
you did
Let me
that.
hold your hand while
Let
I
me
say
hold
this.
your hand when I said this. If you are overstressed in your life, that is you. You allowed everyone else to hand you their monkey and you said, don't worry, let me take that off your back. And you are currently carrying everyone else's problems because you did not set your boundaries. So if I tell you anything and you listen, start working on that. And you can start small, very small. You kind of just practice. And the more you practice, the more it's going to work out for you. I've been practicing for a hot minute. So I can actively say my life got so much better after I started like setting these boundaries. I'm still there's still some things that I still need to keep practicing on, but we're getting there.
We'll get there.
But yeah, I just kind of want to talk about that today because I was thinking about it. I was like, ooh.
Yeah, you texted me and you were like, "This is just so wild that like they just told us not to do that."
Correct,
It's
and
the
and
exact
I
opposite of what
understand
you'd
exactly
expect.
why because she was a
Yeah.
very empathetic person. So like it was very hard for her to like imagine a situation where like it's hard for people I think that are so empathetic to like set a boundary because they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings.
Yeah,
They want to be friends with everyone. You want to feel loved, but you have to like. We were talking with our friend the other day when she came over about setting boundaries and she's like, I feel like you guys, like you could just cut people off, no problem. And it's like, unfortunately it's because we've had some practice, but it took us a long time to get there. But now seeing the other side of life after cutting off
the negativity.
I don't know why we didn't do it sooner. Like,
Right.
So just one thing. Food for thought, y'all.
Food for thought.
And
Practice your boundaries.
It's a nonfiction book, so proud of me.
Yeah.
I don't know if I read the whole thing, but
I probably made it through
halfway.
like chapter 1 and just
I'm
said
like,
we're good enough.
I
We get the
have been
point.
self-helped. Good
Consider
enough.
myself
I don't want any. I'm more of a doer rather than. Oh my goodness. Okay, did we hit on all the topics?
I think so. I think that covered everything.
Was I good on time?
I think so. I think you're good.
People are gonna be like, every single podcast she asks us, guys, I'm a chatter. So
Yeah. No, you'll talk for like literally an hour and a half and then we have to edit them. But this is not going to be edited.
No.
This is just
raw.
like
raw
you're
dog.
sitting here on the couch with us.
Love that. Okay, perfect. Well, you want to outro us?
No, you outro.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for joining us today. We'll see you next week.
We'll see you next week.